Hi and welcome to this DCP Web Blender 2.8 Volumetric tutorial part 2. So let's continue where we left off before. We'll open up Blender and we'll go to File, Open, and then on my desktop I've got the folder that we was working on before, and we've got Volumetric Lighting 01.blend. This is the file we saved last. We're going to click Open here and we'll see our scene, and we're in shading at the moment. So we're going to go to Layout here, the Layout tab. We'll click that and then we'll go to File, Save As, and we're going to save it as version 2. So we'll just change the 1 to a 2 and we'll save it, so any work we do won't affect the first version that we've done. We'll just grab this transformer, or you can press the letter N on the keyboard to hide it. So N will open it and hide it. And we want to go to the shading view here, the render view, so we can see it rendered out. And the first thing we want to do is click on the camera here. So we'll click camera, we'll go to its object data here, and we're just going to reduce, we're going to move the camera back basically. We'll just move the camera back a little bit so we can see the text here. We can see it anyway, but we just want to move it back a little bit, maybe even a little bit more, something like this. So once you've done that, click on the light text. We've got this text called light text here, and we just want to grab the text. So we want to use the move tool here and grab that light text and drag it to the left or the right a little bit. Let's move it to the right a little bit, just a little bit to the right, and then we'll press F12 to render. Then we can see this light that's going to be emitted around the side of this object. So this white stuff that we're seeing on the around the edge here is actually the light object. So what we need to do now is go to the material for the light and increase it, and we want to make it something around, we'll try around 8.8, so let's just make it around number 9, and we want to drag that up a little bit as well. So we want it to be like this, so it's almost like a beveled edge around there, but it's the light source that's giving us that effect, right, of the sort of almost like shading around the edge of these letters. So that light is pretty bright. We want to bring it down a bit. Let's try around 6.6, and that's probably going to be okay. And then we want to change the color of the light, so you can pick any color you like. I suggest that whatever color is in the middle here, so if you've got red, green, purple, whatever color you've got in here, you want to go to the light text here, go to its material and change it to a similar color like green. So you'll have green on green, and then it's kind of, you know, you've got a bit of a color scheme going there. So we can render that now, and we'll see our text with this red, sorry, with this green outline, and that green outline is a bit thick, so we want to reduce that a little bit. So we drag it. What we can do with our mouse wheel is we can zoom in using our mouse wheel, and we can tweak this a little bit better. So we can just drag it to the left a little bit and maybe drag it down a little bit to something like this. We don't want it to be so prominent. Something like that isn't too bad. Maybe we drag it out to the, let's see, maybe we'll have it flat like that and just drag it up a little bit. So just try and get your alignment something like this. Something like that looks pretty good. So the text is pretty much sitting behind but dragged up a little bit, the light source, and we can probably move it down just a little bit to something like this. And you can play around with that, right, and just get that light effect. And then we can increase the strength and see what it looks like. I think that's going to be okay, because you've got this little bloom effect around the edge of the light, around the edges, and we can increase or decrease that. So we can go to our render settings here and we can zoom out a little bit, and then in the bloom settings here we can change the radius of that bloom, right? So we can have it quite a lot. We want to have it quite high up, so we want that sort of misty effect from the light source. And then the threshold, we can adjust that as well to just tweak it to however we want. Something around here will be good. You can play around with these other settings to just tweak it and get it the way that exactly you want it, right? So have a play around. When you're happy with what you see, I think I'm going to bring that down actually. The intensity. Something like this I think will be okay. And again, you can play around with these settings and do whatever you want to them. Experiment. So I'm going to stick with this for now. I'm going to save this. Let's just rotate around. I think that looks okay. So we'll go back into camera view. And now, what do we want to do? We want to parent these three objects. And we want to make the face the parent, right? The front text. So to do that, we're going to rotate around the side, something like this. It doesn't really matter, somewhere around here. And these top three here are the text objects. So whichever one you want to be the parent, you must select that one last. So if we select the smoke, hold down the shift key, select the light, and then the front text at the end. So we select that one at the very end. Then we'll come to this scene here and press Control P, and we'll click Object. Now, if we click the front text on its own and move it, it will move all of the objects with it, right? So whatever we do to this front text, if we move the text backwards, forwards, up, down, left, right, the light text, so the text that sits in the middle, and the smoke emitter will move with it. So you can almost think as the think of it as the front text is now the master text. Wherever we move this text, the front text will move with it, right? So if you move the text to somewhere like here and you want to undo that, just press Ctrl Z to undo that. Okay, let's press. If you want to move to camera view, you can click here, right? So you can move to camera view. When you hover over it, it says there shortcut numpad 0. So if you press 0 on your keyboard, that will always take you back to camera view. So when you're rotating around and you're looking at your objects and stuff and you want to see what the camera sees, just press 0 on the keyboard and that will always take you back to camera view. Let's just press F12 and render it one more time. This is what we're seeing. We're going to probably move this text back a bit more when we animate it, right? We don't want it to be too close, we want it to move forward. So let's just see, let's just move that text back to somewhere like here. And then we'll press 0. We can see the text there. We'll press F12 to render it. We can see what our render is going to look like. This will be like one frame, right? I think that will be okay. Now, what we want to do is click on the smoke text here. So click on that, and that's selected in at the very back. That's the text sitting at the very back. Then we want to go to Object, and we want to go to Quick Effects and Quick Smoke here. That would add what we call a domain. So this yellow orange box thing is where the smoke's going to be emitted from. If we click play, we won't really be able to see it too well here. So if we go to the wireframe, we can see the smoke there. So if we go back to the first frame, we'll see this smoke being emitted from this back layer of this text, this object in the back. So what we want to do is go to the solid view. Let's see, solid view. Let's have a look at look there view. What we want to do is let's just go to wireframe for a minute. So we'll stick in wireframe, this view here, and we'll press number 7 on our keyboard. We're going to move between let's have a look at number 3. So number 3 is the side view, right? So we're looking at it from the right side here at the moment, and let's just press number 7 for the moment. So number 7, that's the top view, and we can see the camera is right down here. This is the camera, and this is going to be the smoke domain, this box here. You can click on it here, you'll see smoke domain written here, and we want to make that domain bigger. So let's pause it and go to the first frame, and we want to stretch it on the green arrow, which is the y-axis. So we're going to press S to scale, and then the letter Y, and then we're going to scale it out to something like around this sort of size. So not close to double the size, that almost like a box, but a little bit less, right? Something like this. That's what you want to see. It's almost covering, you know, the width of these two grey boxes here. Something like this. because we want to move this text backwards and forwards. We might even make it a bit bigger actually. So let's press number 7. We'll press S to scale and then Y, and we'll make it a bit bigger, something like this. So it's almost like a box now. You can see a squared box, something like this. Now we'll press 0, press 0 on the keyboard, and we can see what the camera sees. And we want to make this smoke domain bigger. We want to make it taller so that the smoke will flow out of the camera view. So to do that, let's press number 3 on our keyboard. We'll press number 3, and now we're in the right side orthographic, and we want to scale it up on the height. So the height will be Z axis. So we'll press S and then Z, and we'll scale it up. Let's scale it up to something like this, about this sort of size. And then we want to move it. So after you left clicked, it will cancel, it will accept the scale, and then you want to click on this blue arrow and drag it up so that it sits above this green line here. So when we rotate back around to the front and we press 0, we'll see that our smoke domain, this is the camera, this is what the camera will see, right? This box here. So if we press and then the smoke domain is now sitting outside of the camera view, because we want the smoke to float out of the screen. It doesn't really need to be that high, to be honest. It could have been a little bit less, but we can always click on it and scale it again. I think it will be fine. We'll leave it like this. It should be fine. Let's go back to our render view, and in fact what we want to do is click on the wireframe view, and we want to pan around to the side and click the play button. Just make sure we can see smoke. So we can see smoke now, and if we press 0, we'll see what the camera sees, right? And the smoke's going to float off up here. I think that should be okay. That should be fine. Let's just pause it. Let's just see. Yeah, that should be fine. And what we want to do is we want to set our frames a bit shorter while we're working with this smoke, right? We don't want to have it to loop all the way back around to 250 frames. So we're going to set it to something like 90 frames, and we're going to click the play button, and now this smoke will emit, but it will loop back a lot quicker because it's only 90 frames of animation. And what we want to do is click on the smoke domain here, and we want to go to the smoke domain physics, and for now we're going to set the render resolution to 60. So it'll render out a bit slower, but we're going to get a bit more detail in our smoke. So we'll set it to 60 here, and we want to go to the smoke text here. Click on smoke text, and we'll click on the physics here, and the surface we want to bring that right down to 0.5. So we want the text to emit less smoke, basically, right? And the density setting will affect how fast that smoke rises. This density here, we can tweak it a bit. So it's not so dense now, right? So for now I'm going to set the surface to 0.5 and then the density to 0.2. And I'm going to tick off initial velocity here. Tick this off and leave these settings pretty much as they are. Then we'll go back to the smoke domain here, this one, and we'll go to the material here, and we will go to the surface and select, let's have a look here, we want principled volume here. So select principled volume, and then in theory, is it down here? Let's have a look. Volume. In volume, we should be able to change the color of the smoke here. not that we want to. We need to go into wireframe. That's why I don't think we see it. Let's put this back to white, and it's this volume here that should change the color. Okay, we see it in this look dev mode. We want the smoke to be black anyway, so we should set these settings to black. Leave the color attribute, where is it, this color here, just set it to black, and then set this volume color here to black as well. And then if we go to our render view, we'll just about see the smoke, because it's at such a low resolution, you'll just about see the smoke coming through. But when we scale up the resolution here, we'll be able to see the smoke much clearer. It looks a bit hazy at the moment, but if we look at the this render example, you can see the smoke a lot clearer in here, right? That's because it's got a higher resolution. So when we bake it, we'll bake it at a higher resolution, so it'll be a lot clearer. Right now we're looking at a very low resolution, but we can see the smoke. We can see it here in the wireframe. So what we want to do is pause this, go to the first frame, and we're going to set this frame now to 240. So the end frame will be 240. In fact, that's probably a bit too much. For now, let's set it to 180. We'll set it to 180. And we want to click on the front text here. And let's just make sure, let's go to our render view and press 0. And we want to decide how far away is, I think this text, let's press F12. Let's see the text. Well, I think it's still a bit too close. I think it needs to be further away from the camera. So we can either move the camera or move the text. I think we'll move the text. So let's just rotate around and we'll drag this text back a bit to closer to this light source. Let's see, and then press F12. The text is further back now. I think that should be okay. Let's just see what I did in my example, right? Let's just pause this. So I think the text was, because there's quite a big gap on the sides here. So let's just go back to here. Let's have a look at the camera view and we'll render it. And the gaps are pretty big on the side, so I think that should be okay. I think it could probably, we could probably move the camera back a little bit. So what we'll do is go to the camera, click the camera and go to its object data here, the object data here, and on the Y we want to reduce it and bring it back to somewhere like here. Let's press F12 and see what that looks like. I think that's going to be good. So we need to move that camera back a little bit. We've already moved the text back as well. Now what we want to do is just fix these lights. So we'll click on the first light in the middle is fine. The one on the left, we just want to drag it up out of the camera view. So this box here is the camera, right? So we don't want to see that light. We want to drag it to the side here somewhere. So it's just kind of sitting off the side. And then we'll click on the second light on this side and drag it to this side, about here, and move that one up as well. Let's just drag it up here. So I think that will be okay. Let's go File, Save, and press F12. That's what I'm looking for, something like this. So we don't see the lights, but we see the light effect from it, from the sides, and we see the one in the middle. That's fine. And then we've got the floor color here from the lights as well, so that's fine. So what we want to do now is animate that text. So let's see, we want the text to move forward. We can do this in wireframe for now, so we're going to go to wireframe mode and we're going to rotate around the side here. In fact, what we'll do is we'll go to camera view. It'll probably be better to do this in camera view, and we'll go into the render view. Let's leave it in render view and let's just zoom out a little bit. We'll click on the camera so we can see this box here is going to be what the camera can see, right? So let's click on the we want to click on the front text, and we want to go here and click record. So click this record button and move to the screen and press the letter I, and we're going to insert a location, rotation and scale. So that will insert a keyframe for this text, this front text. And now we want to move to frame 90. I think 90 should be fine. Let's do 1, 2, 3. Yeah, frame 90. And then we want to move this object on its y-axis, right? So that we want to move it forward. So we're going to move it forward to about here. And then just untick the record button, click the back button, and click play. And we'll see our text move slowly forward to something like this. And I think let's go back to the first frame and let's just check it in wireframe. So if we click wireframe mode and play, we can see the text moving forward, the smoke like this. And when it gets to let's see, because what we want the smoke to emit while this text is moving, but when it gets to the last frame, or when it gets closer to this frame number 90, we want the smoke to fade off. So we don't want it to keep emitting smoke all the way to the very last frame. So to do that, we need to change some settings. We need to change the density. So on frame 1, so we'll go to this first frame here, we'll hit the record button and we'll go to the smoke text here, smoke text, and we'll go to the physics, and on density we'll move our mouse over density and we'll hit the letter I, and that will insert a keyframe on the first frame for this value. Then we'll move to frame 90. So we'll move across it. To move these frames here, you need to right click and drag, right? So we'll move to frame 90 and we'll click here again and set the density to, we'll leave it at 2. So we'll just hit the letter I and that will insert a keyframe. So between these frames, the density won't change. It will just stay static. Then from frame 90 to frame 110, we're going to move to here. We're going to click on here. We'll press the letter I, but this time we'll set it to 0 on this frame here. So if we go back, untick the record and play it, in theory it should play up to here with smoke, and when it gets to here, the smoke is going to fade out. Can you see? It stops emitting smoke. That's what we want. We'll just watch it one more time. We could probably tweak this a little bit, so we can click on this keyframe here and maybe move it to like 125, around this sort of position, because we want that smoke at the end to fade out, or yeah, to fade out a bit slower, something like this. Yeah, that should be good. That will look good. Should do. Let's go back to the first frame. We'll save this. And now we want to create the particle emitter. So to do that, let's go back to our solid view, and we'll press Shift A, and we want to insert an icosphere here. So now we've got this sphere here. We're going to drag it up a little bit. Press S to scale it, and we're going to scale it down to make it a bit smaller, something like this sort of size. And we want this sphere to sit directly on top of the light source. So you know we've got this light here. We want this to be exactly in the same position, or roughly almost in the same position. So we can press number 7 on our keyboard. That takes us into the top view, and that allows us to drag it so it overlaps here, right? Nice and simple. Then we can press number 3 on our keyboard, and that takes us to the right view, and we can just see that it's overlapping here. And we can just rotate around the object, and we can see it's sitting right on top of the light source now, yeah? In the exact same position. So let's save this. Now we want to go to particles here, and create new particles, and we'll set this to something like 200 for the minute. So we set the particles to 200, and let's rotate around the side so we can see it from the side and play, and we see the particles are dropping out like this, but we want the particles to go forwards towards the text, towards the camera. So to do that, we're going to go to the physics here, and in the physics we need to reduce the mass. So maybe we'll set it to around like 0.1 for now, and the Brownian we need to increase that. Let's go back to the first frame. Let's rotate around to what the, let's click on the camera, right? So we'll click on the camera. So now we can see what the camera sees. And we've got, basically we've got this randomization of these particles, right? Some are coming towards the camera, some are going to the side, some are going backwards. You can see they're going in all different directions. But we need to increase the number. So we want to set this to like, let's set it to 600, something like this. We might reduce this down a bit. So the nice thing to do is go into the render view and then press 0, and we can see what the camera sees now. And we can see these particles traveling. And maybe we'll set the floor to a collision. I'm not sure. I didn't do that in the last video, that demonstration when I made. But if we click on the floor and go to the physics settings and set collision, they're going to bounce off of the floor. So I don't know if we want that or not. I don't think we want that. Well, let's not do that. So we won't do that. We won't make the floor a collision. We just let the particles, they're just going to flow through the bottom here at the scene. But that's fine because we only want some of them to move towards the camera, not all of them. So I think that should be okay. But what we want is the particles to stop, right? We don't want to see so many towards the end, so, and we don't want them to start straight away. So let's go to the icosphere. Where is it gone? This one here. We'll go to the particle settings, and we want to start them on like, let's set this to around, let's set it to around 5, and let's see. We want a bit of a delay before those particles start to be emitted. Yeah, something like that. So we want to set this to around frame 15. So it will play a little bit. The text will start to move, and then the particles will be emitted slightly after. And then we want to end it on like around frame, I think around frame 100. So let's set this to frame 100. Like this. Let's save this. Let's go back to the first frame and play it. I think 600 might be a bit too much. Let's set it to 400. Let's go back to the first frame. So I think that'll be okay, 400. We'll do it like that. We can always change it later, tweak it or update it, but let's leave it like that for now. So now we need to make the particles that are going to be emitted from this particle system, and we're going to use spheres to do that. So let's press, let's just save this quickly, save it, press Shift A, and we're going to insert a mesh UV sphere. So we've got this sphere here, and we can go into, okay, we can leave it in this view for the minute. So we've got one sphere here, and we want to go to object, and we want to shade smooth. So we smooth shade it, and we press control. In fact, what we want to do, we're doing this slightly wrong, so let's fix this. Let's just drag this down. We only drag this down to give it a bit more space. Let's do this the right way. So let's click on this sphere. It's selected, and delete it. Just delete it. And we're going to go to the scene collection here. Click here and create a new collection. So we're going to create this new collection. And we're going to put our particles, or our objects that are going to be the particles, into this collection. So we double click here and call it particles. And now we're going to place the spheres into this collection here. So we press Shift A again, and we do a UV sphere, and then we can drag it up, drag it to the side, and go to object, smooth shade, or shade smooth, and then we press Shift D to duplicate it, hit the enter key, and then press Shift D one more time, and then press the enter key. So we should have 3 spheres now. We can see 3 of them here. We'll click on the middle one, this one, and we drag it to the middle, and we'll click on the bottom one here, and we drag that over here. Then we should see these 3 spheres. Let's save this. Then we'll click on the first one, and we'll go to the material. Let's click on this first one. Let's see why. Here we go. Let's click on it, and then go to material, and then create a new material. And we want to make this an emission, and we'll leave it as it is for now. Let's go to the next one. We'll create a material for that one and set that to emission as well, and we'll do the same for the third one. Let's click on the third one, new material, and we'll set that to an emission. So now we've got these 3 spheres. They're all white. So we'll click on the first one, and we'll click on the color, and I'm going to set one to yellow, and I'm going to set this middle one to something like a light blue, and then the last one I'm going to set it to an off color like purple, something like this. These 3 colors, you can pick any colors you like. File, save it, and then we want to select these 3 objects. So click on the first one, hold down the Shift key, and select the other 2 with your mouse, and we want to drag this out of the camera view. So we want to drag it upwards and just drag it over to the left here somewhere like over here. In fact, we can leave it in the middle for the minute while we're working, and then later we'll drag it off to the left out of the view. Now we need to go to the smoke. We want to go to the particle emitter, right? So this icosphere, we should really name it to icosphere particle. Just give it a name so we know what it is. So I've called it icosphere particle. That's what's generating our particles. So we'll click on that. We'll go to the particle system here, and in the render we want to turn off the emitter. So when we render these particles, the sphere itself won't be rendered. We don't want to render that sphere in the scene, only in the, we can leave it in the viewport. We can leave it showing here so we can see it in our scene when we're doing our work, but we don't want to show it when we render out the frames. In the halo here, we need to select collection. So select collection here, click on this drop down, and then click on this little box here, and then select particles. And then let's have a look here. What we need to do is play it. We should play it, and we can see the colored spheres now, right? And what we want to do is probably scale them up a bit, not too big, let's say about 0.08, and then we'll put this randomness all the way to the top. So if we go back, if we click on this option here to get rid of overlays. So this will get rid of all of the overlays, right? You can hide and show them. So we'll hide it for the minute and we'll click play. Let's go to the first frame and click play. Then we can see these spheres being emitted. Now what we need to do is increase the power of those lights, right? Those spheres. So we'll click on the first one, we'll go to the material and we'll increase its strength. Let's try and set it to around 9, maybe a bit more, let's say around 13. Let's do the same for the other ones. Let's increase those to around 13. So all of them are roughly around 13. We can pause it on a frame like this. So I'm pausing it on frame 108 and we'll press F12 to render it. And we can see those spheres now and they're glowing because we've got the bloom setting and the lights are more powerful. So the ones that are in the background, the smaller ones, they're not going to emit so much light because they're further away and they won't glow as much, but as they get closer to the camera they're going to glow more, right? So if we move to another frame, let's say like this one here, we'll see that one on its own. It's not even rendering out here. Let's go back to the first frame and play it. Pause it around here, press F12. Now we can see them quite clearly. So that looks okay. You can play around with that. You can use different colors, whatever colors you like with those for those particular particles. Just remember that after you set them all up, you need to go back to these 3 spheres and increase the strength of them so that they can be seen. So we could set them quite high. Let's set them around 18 and let's see what that looks like. So if we go back to the first frame and play it, we pause around here and press F12. Yeah, I think we set them quite high, something like this. Should be okay. So let's save this. And now we need to, let's just keep playing and make sure they fade out okay, the particles. Can you see the UV sphere here? Covering the light. So when we render, if we press F12, you'll notice that it doesn't get rendered in the scene. So we didn't want that rendered in the scene. We want it only to be rendered or to be displayed in our viewport so we can see it in the viewport. And we did that. Remember, we told it not to render that in our scene. We don't want that in the actual final render. The only thing I can see, let's move it to like around frame 160 and we'll press F12. I think that's okay. The only thing that really bothers me is that this light is not really, it would have been better if it was centered out a bit more, right? Because it's quite close to this W, but it's further away from this letter P. So it would be easier to move the light source and move the, yeah, let's just do that anyway. I'm a bit picky like that. So what we can do is click on it's this first light, this one here. This one, if we, let's have a look here. Let's turn back on our overlays. So we turn back on the overlays. And on a frame 160, let's just move that light to the left a little bit. So the light source is here now. Let's just render that F12. Now the light is kind of in the middle. It looks a bit better, that positioning there, rather than being really close to the W. That's what I want. So all we need to do now is move the icosphere, right? So we'll click on that as well. Sometimes it's easier to do this in sort of wireframe mode. We just want to drag it. It's a little bit hard to see, right? So let's see, where's that light? That light is almost overlapping, right? Not very far apart. So if we press number 7 on our keyboard, we can see it from the top view. and that's the light and that's the icosphere. So we just want to zoom in here, so we can zoom in, and we just want to move this. So can you see the light source there, that little black dot? We just want to move it so the icosphere sits on top of it like this. So if we go back to our render view and then press 0, we'll see that rendered view now. Let's just save this and press F12. Now we can see that. If we go back to the first frame and play it, our particles will now be emitted from that particular point, which should be fine. Okay. Now what we need to do is go back to the first frame here. Let's just save this. Let's go to the icosphere particles. We'll go to the particle here. We'll go to the cache settings here and we'll bake it. So click the bake button, and that's going to keep that sequence of particles in memory. So you don't have to keep trying to work out where these particles are going. It knows where they're going now. So when it comes to rendering, it's going to need this information to render those particles in their correct trajectory and all that good stuff. So let's go back to the first frame. And we want to, we've done the smoke, right, but we want to set it to a higher resolution. So for now, what we can do is go to the render settings here. And in the viewport samples, let's set this to something like 120. And in the render samples, we'll set that to 120. In the volumetric lighting, we'll expand this, and in the samples here we're going to set this to 100. So we set the samples here to 100, and we set the tile size to 4 like this, and then the volumetric shadows, we're going to set that to around 60. Now if we save this and then go to the smoke emitter, the smoke domain, click on the smoke domain, go to its properties here, the physics, and we want to basically we want to make the resolution of this smoke much better. So we're going to set the divisions here, the resolution to 120, set that to 120, and then in fact let's set it to 60 for the minute. We'll leave it at 60, and we're going to tick this dissolve and tick it. We'll go to the wireframe mode and click play. We can see the smoke is dissolving quite quickly, so we want to increase the time here to maybe around 50. Let's see. Let's go back to the first frame. Yeah, I think 50 is going to be good here for the dissolve. So if you set this to a low number, the smoke will dissolve very quickly. If you set it to around 50, it's got time to move. If you look at it from the side, right, as the smoke is moving, you can see like it's being trailed behind like this. And we set the dissolve to around 50, so that should look pretty good. We'll pause this. Actually, we'll leave it playing for the minute. We'll set the, in fact, we have to pause it. Let's pause it and go to the first frame. Let's click File, Save. We'll go back to here and set the divisions to 120, and we're going to go to High Resolution. Tick this option here, High Resolution, and set it to 2. Set it to 2. Let's save this. Now we need to bake the smoke, and this is going to take some time, so now's the time to go and make a cup of tea. What we're going to do is click here underneath the, let's see, where are we, cache settings, and we're going to click bake all dynamics. Just click this button, but let's be careful, right? We're going to make a mistake here. We want to set the bake settings to 180 frames, 180 here. So make sure you set it to 180 here. Probably we don't need to, it should be fine. Let's just leave it at 180. Make sure you do that because we've got 180 frames here. And then we're going to click Bake All Dynamics. And this is going to take some time. This is where you've got to be patient, maybe go and do something else for a little while. But this will take some time. It's probably going to take about 15 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video, and after it's finished baking all these frames, we're going to check it one more time, do a few test renders, and then we're going to render out the frames, and we should be close to being done. But we want to animate the floor as well. Do you remember we want some movement on the floor? So we'll try and do that as well. So I'll pause it now, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes to see the final bake of this smoke. Okay, so Blender's finished baking out the smoke dynamics. It's done all the 180 frames. So it took about 10 minutes to do that. It can take quite some time for it to bake out all the frames, but you see the smoke dynamics will be much more high resolution now compared to before, but it will play quite slow within the viewport. If we pause this and go back to the first frame, we can go to our render settings. And in our render settings, we've got the viewport samples and we've got the render samples. So we can set this to a lower value like 60, just for the viewport, and that will help it to play a little bit smoother, a little bit quicker. But it might be, it's a lot of calculations going on here for it to render that smoke, but you'll at least be able to see the smoke quite clearly now inside of a Blender. But it might be a little bit laggy, but that's okay. We're not going to see it like this when we finish off our frames and render them out. If we pause it on like this frame here, let's say around 104, and press F12, it will take quite a bit of time to render out each frame. It'll be around 10 seconds, maybe a little bit more. But then we can see the smoke here now is at a much higher resolution. It will look much better in the scene. So that's one thing I wanted to do. Let's go back to frame 1. This step is kind of optional. You don't have to do this, but I think it will look better as well. So we'll go back to our render view here, so we can see the render. And the first thing we really want to do is get rid of these lights here are emitting light. So if we go to our camera view, we don't really see them because they're quite high up, but we should really move them completely out of the view, because the camera might pick up some of these like purples and blues. If you like it, leave it, but normally these spheres, the purpose of them is to generate the particles, right? They don't serve any purpose, so we just move them up higher, so they're most definitely out of the camera view. We can zoom out a little bit and move them to the right, so they won't be emitting any light in this scene. We don't really want that we don't want that basically. So this box represents our camera, and what we want to do is have some movement on this floor. Now the way we're going to do that is go to the first frame here, and we need to go back into, there's a couple of ways to do this. In fact, what we'll do is we'll move our mouse cursor to the side here, and when you move between two windows, if you move right in between them, you'll get the mouse cursor looking like this, like two arrows pointing side by side. If we right click, we can split the area, and then you get this line that you can say where you want to split, and we want to split around something like here, for example. So we've got these two windows now, and in the top one we want to go to shading, the shader here. So we've got the shader up here, and at the moment, let's have a look. It's looking at the light object, so we want to select the floor, which is the plane here. We want to make sure the plane is selected, and we want to basically, right now it's set to 17.6 here, you can see, right? So we want to hit the record button, and we want to set this to, we want to move our mouse over this 17 point, where it says 17.6, move our mouse over there and press the letter I, and that will insert a keyframe for that value. Then we want to move over to, let's say, frame 180, or maybe just before that, let's say 175, and then we want to just change this value to something like let's say 28.1, something like this. You can play around with these settings, and as we scrub through, you'll see the floor will start to shimmer and move, right? It's not really, it looks like almost like there's mist over the floor, and that's kind of the effect that I wanted. So that's all we're going to do there for that. and we can now hit that record button to stop the recording, and we can move our mouse cursor in between these two frames, the top and the bottom one, right click and say join area, and then click to the top, and that will get rid of that top window and just make this one big window. Now we can play it now, and it will move pretty slow, but at least we can see like the effects that we're going to be creating here with the floor and the smoke coming out. So it is possible to set these viewport samples to a lower value. That should help with the speed a little bit. Let's go back to the first frame. Yeah, it's still going to be, the smoke dynamics are quite high, so it's going to be a bit slow in this viewport, but that doesn't matter for now. So we'll let this play through. The particles will stop emitting, the smoke's finished, and it's going to rise up a little bit. And then this floor will stop moving on around frame 175, and then we just got a few still frames at the end, which is fine. So we're pretty much done. We can go and render now. It might be nice that when we get to around frame, let's see, on frame 90, the text stops moving, right? So let's do one more thing. What we'll do before we finish is we'll go back to frame 1. Let's go to frame 1. Let's click the record button here, and we'll go to the camera. So we'll select the camera, and we'll move to the viewport, and we'll press the letter I, and we say insert a location, rotation and scale for the camera. And the camera, we want it still at this beginning part. It's going to get all the way to frame 90, and on frame 90 we want it to be static as well, so it's going to be still on frame 90. So we just hit the letter I and insert a location, rotation and scale. So between these 2 points the camera doesn't move. Then we're going to go to frame 100, and we're going to insert another iframe. So we set I and then insert location, rotation and scale, and then from frame 100 to 130, between these two distances we want the camera to slightly move. So we'll look at the camera data here, the object data, and we want to move it slightly upwards, right? Like we want it to rise up a little bit to something like here, so that text is almost in the center of this frame, right? It's nice and centered here, and then that's pretty much all we want to do. So we hit the record button, and we can see the camera will move slightly between these frames. We could probably extend that a little bit, so maybe we'll click on this keyframe here and just drag it to like a frame 140, give it a bit more duration, and we can go to this frame here, click play, and we'll see the camera will slightly rise up, and then our floor will keep moving, and then we'll have like this still section, right? We'll have a few still frames at the end. Probably there's probably no point in having them still frames, so what we could do, we just leave them there. You can always delete the still frames, or normally I leave a few frames at the end, because if I want to do a crossfade in some sort of editing software. So if I took this animation and put it into my YouTube intro, for example, at the end normally I want a few frames so I can fade in and out, fade across. So it's worth having a few empty frames at the end, just still frames that you can work with. So let's just go to File, Save. Now let's go to the render settings. It's set to 120, that's fine. It's set to 100 samples here and 60 here. So we'll go to the output, and we're going to render it at 4 1080p frames each one, and we're going to render them out as 16-bit color. It'll be a PNG file. We're going to click this folder here, and we're going to go to the desktop, to this folder here, and inside here we're going to create a new folder and call it frames, and we'll click on that frames folder, and we're going to store all of our frames in here. We'll click accept, and we'll press Control and F12. Hold down the Control key and press F12. In fact, what we should do is go File, Save, Control F12. Now Blender, you can see, is going to render out each frame. Each frame is going to take around 10 seconds to render, a little bit longer. So now's a time to go and make your second cup of tea and go and do something else for a while, because this is probably going to take about 20 minutes or something to render out all these frames. So I'm going to pause the video here, and once all the frames are rendered, we're going to create the final video sequence, which will be a lot quicker, and then this tutorial will be finished. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of the frames for the video animation. So if we close this window here, this is the last frame, you can see 180. We close this window, and in Blender we can see that it's done all 180 frames. And if we go to this folder on my desktop and we look inside the frames folder, we should see all 180 frames, starting from 1 all the way down to 180. Make sure you don't see any sort of black frames or anything strange in here. These all look fine. We can just double click on a couple just to check them, and they look okay. So that's all good. Now let's go back to Blender and create the video sequence. First thing we should do is File, Save, and then go to this little option here and then select video sequencer here. Then we'll go to Add Image Sequence, and we'll go to that same frames folder, and we need to select all of the frames in here. So select all 180. Sometimes you can't see all of the frames, so you select all of these. So you can see I've selected frame 1 to 175 here. If I scroll to the side, don't forget to select these last frames. Just drag your mouse over them and you'll select all of them now, yeah? Just make sure they're all selected. You'll know they are, because when you click Add Strip, you'll see it will say 180 here as well. So normally I'll quickly go to the sequencer and preview and just check it here and just scrub a few frames. Make sure that you can see everything clearly. That looks all fine. So let's just quickly go to File, Save, and we'll go to our output settings here. And this time we're going to change it from PNG to AVI RAW. So we'll do an AVI RAW, and we'll click RGB here, and then we'll just press Control and F12, and this will take about 2 or 3 minutes to render out. So I'm going to pause the video here, and then we'll see the final render sequence of the video at the end. Okay, so Blender's finished creating the video sequence. This is the last frame on 180, so we can close this. Normally I'll go back to the 3D viewport here, go to File, Save. So if we ever come back and do more edits, we'll be in the 3D viewport. We can close down Blender now, and we can go to this folder, and now we've got a third version of this. We've got these 2 versions I created before, and now I've got this third AVI here. So let's open that up and let's check out what we've done. We'll leave it on repeat, and we can just watch it a few times, and you can see the smoke is quite well rendered. It's got high resolution to it, so you can see the smoke quite clearly. You've got all the particles, you've got the floor moving. We've done a pretty good job here. It didn't take too long. Now that you've got this skill set, you can go and create loads of different versions of this. You can change the colors, you can change the particles, you can change their direction. You can do quite a lot of things yourself now using the skills that you have. So one thing we could have done probably is move these lights. You see these lights in the corner? We could have animated them and moved them across the screen. We could have done something like that, and then more of this floor would have been highlighted up. But I quite like the way that the mist is moving. Well, it's not really mist, we're just moving this texture on the floor, right? This dynamic on the floor. But it looks pretty good. It looks like there's mist floating across the floor. I think it looks okay. I like the smoke. The smoke come out pretty well. So we'll watch it one more time. And now it's time for you to go and experiment with this particular render. You can change the light around the text as well. You can make quite a few changes here and play around with it. You could have spun the text around in 360. We've done that in other tutorials. If you check the other tutorials, remember we spun the text around and we did particles and stuff. So now you can really play around with this, and using the other tutorials we've done before, you can really experiment and play around with the settings in here and make another video sequence. So we'll close that down. What I will do is close this as well. That's the end of this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.